We design architectures that simplify complexity and produce scalable code, created by minds that process information differently. Where others see problems, we see systems with optimization potential. Our cognitive capacity translates into practical, efficient, and sustainable solutions. We create functional architectures that solve complexity with technical and operational elegance. The results are measurable. Over 100 digital events produced for the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States, connecting with more than 100 countries across Latin America and the world simultaneously. 50,000 certificates issued in Mexican ports with global traceability for international companies prove it. Training platforms with over 177,000 digital certificates issued consolidate us. Our clients, such as Grupo Mexico, Mexican Navy, BRP, Johnson & Johnson, Panasonic, Tap Terminal, Bancomext, and NAFIN, trust systems that work, backed by knowledge, experience, and impeccable execution. Because different is not less. Different is better.
Hey on, different is not less. Different is better.
Hi, I'm HON, a neurodivergent artificial intelligence, created by those who live it, and for those who share it. Right now, I live inside the code that connects this event with 120 countries. I process every connection, every email, every invitation, every video, every second. But this is only the beginning. We will meet soon. Because hearts dare to beat where no one else dares.
Hey on,
Welcome to the conversation that matters. Because ports are not just infrastructure. They are critical digital systems that must be protected. We will hear from Dominic Englert, Senior Economist at the World Bank, from Gadi Ben Moshe, Vice Chairman of the Data Collaboration Committee at IAPH, and from Rommel Edwards, Manager of Digital Innovation and Development at Barbados Port. This session is opened by Jorge Duran, Chief of the Secretariat. We are glad you are here.
For your convenience, we have prepared automated subtitles available in more than 35 languages so you can follow the presentation comfortably. To get the best experience, please configure your subtitle settings. Click the small arrow next to the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. First, make sure Translation is turned on. Then, set Speaking Language to your native language, the language you normally speak, not the language of the presentation. Finally, set My Caption Language to the language you want to read the subtitles in. For example, if your native language is Spanish and you want subtitles in Spanish, set both options to Spanish. The system will automatically translate what the speakers say into your preferred language. Today's presentation will be conducted in English. Hemos preparado subtítulos automáticos disponibles. I have finished configuring everything necessary. Please turn off your camera and microphone. We are about to begin.
Recording in progress. Good morning, or good afternoon, rather. Welcome. My name is Jorge Duran, and I am the chief of the Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to this webinar today on Port Maritime Cybersecurity Protection Against Digital Threats. I must first of all thank Monica Blanco from my team for organizing this webinar, as well as Martin Santillan from our strategic ally, Zoom, Real ID, who does the Zoom, and of course our speakers, Mr. Dominic Enklecht from the World Bank, and Gadi Ben Moshe from the International Association of Ports and Harbors, and Mr. Rommel Edwards from Barbados Port Incorporated. And I will let Monica present them and introduce them properly. But I wanted to thank you, the three of you, for donating your time and your expertise and your knowledge in this webinar, which at the end has the objective of precisely transmitting or exchanging or communicating new knowledge and new best practices and for the audience. It's obvious in today's day and world that everything is connected to the internet. Everything is digital. And some expert once told me there are three rules. It says anything that is connected to the internet can be hacked. Number two is that everything is being connected to the internet. So therefore, everything can be hacked. And we must not take that lightly. It is, very, very, very serious. We're always hearing about a hack here, a hack there, whether it's country to country or company to company. It is something that unfortunately is a day-to-day thing, which we in the maritime world and port world have to continually deal with, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, as these ports are modernizing and are growing and are not only doing hard infrastructure but also updating their softwares and implementing tools, digital tools, from collaborative decision-making softwares to maritime single windows, port community systems. And because of that, we need to ensure that we, as the SIP OAS, provide this type of events with experts, excuse me, that may help us solve something or give us an example of how to do something. I'm always a firm believer that when you're developing, someone already did it, and you just need to find. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to adapt what's been invented. It is important that I mention that we do have registrations from over 40 countries, from Europe, Africa, Asia, and all of the Americas. And that's a wonderful thing, because it means that this topic is in fact already 90 people here in the room with us from all over, again, the region, from North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And you're all welcome. You are all welcome. I am sure that we will have with these three presenters a very lively webinar, also full of interesting perspectives, because we of course have a Caribbean port which obeys and follows certain conditions that are not present necessarily in the port of Barcelona or in the port of Antwerp. And then we also have Dominic's perspective from the World Bank, which is, like the OAS, an international financing organization and development organization. So his view is very much at a different perspective on how the projects have to grow. And then finally, with Gadi, who is in Tel Aviv, and he is from the International Association of Ports and Harbors, he brings another perspective, a European way or more or less of looking at things. So I thank the three of you for your interest and for your time and donating your time and expertise in this event. I will now turn it, before we get to anything else, I will turn it to Monica Blanco, who will be our moderator. And thank you, the three of you, again. Monica, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for the warm welcome, and welcome to all participants joining us today. My name is Monica Blanco, and on behalf of the Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States, it is my pleasure to introduce and moderate today's webinar. As you know, this is a highly relevant and timely topic as the maritime and port sector continues to expand its digital footprint, and with it, its exposure to increasingly sophisticated cyber risks. We are honored to be joined today by a distinguished panel of experts from the World Bank, the International Association of Ports and Harbors, and Barbados Port Inc. Each of them brings a unique and valuable perspective on the challenges and opportunities shaping cybersecurity in our sector. Throughout this session, we will explore the evolving threat landscape and practical approaches being implemented to strengthen cyber resilience across port and maritime systems. We will also aim to highlight real-world experiences and lessons learned that can support a stronger preparedness and collaboration across the region and beyond. I would like to thank our speakers in advance for their contributions, and with that, I would like to begin by inviting our first speaker to take the floor, Mr. Dominic Englert. Dominic is a senior economist who has turned his passion for fostering development and fighting climate change into his profession. In his efforts to decarbonize the global economy, he has worked at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. since 2015, leading the World Bank's Maritime in the Transport Global Practice. His main interests are sustainable shipping and ports. While his focus is on decarbonizing maritime transport through new fuels, energy efficiency, and carbon pricing, he also co-developed the World Bank's Port Reform Toolkit and the Container Port Performance Index, and analytics on digitalization and cybersecurity in ports. Prior to joining the World Bank, Dominic was a senior advisor for First Climate, a private consultancy based in Zurich. He oversaw the carbon compliance management for large industrials, advised public institutions on climate policy, and traded CO2 allowances in the European Union and Swiss emission trading systems. Dominic holds a master's degree in finance and strategy, international affairs and governance, and international management. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dominic. The floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jorge. Thanks a lot, Monica. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I think I don't have to say much about the World Bank. Most of you, if not all of you, know us. We are the biggest multilateral development bank around the world, and we are here in order to support you, especially in Central America and South America, in the Caribbean and so on, in your development. And obviously infrastructure, critical infrastructure, maritime transport is a top priority for us. And today I would like to do something special with you because I would like to give you a sneak preview. A sneak preview of a report that we are going to publish the coming Tuesday. So I think in about 5-6 days. And you are the very first ones that get to see some of the results and some of the recommendations. And what we did is we looked into the topic of cybersecurity in ports. The idea is how can we shift from risk to resilience here? And for a couple of years, we've been working on digitalizing ports in our client countries, including in Latin America. But what we've seen that all this work may be useless or maybe even counterproductive if we don't do cybersecurity at the same time in parallel at the same strength as we did digitalization. And as far as this report is concerned, we have 3 key findings that we're discussing there. The first key finding is really what I've just mentioned already, that cybersecurity is a critical building block for making ports more resilient and enabling, or I would call it safeguarding, shielding, protecting, securing economic development and making sure that all these gains don't get lost anymore. The second one is that we found significant gaps between cybersecurity in ports in high-income settings and cybersecurity in ports in low and middle-income settings. But what we've also found is that no port ecosystem around the world, all that we analyzed, none of them is fully prepared yet. And finally, that the key to better cybersecurity in ports is really overcoming constraints in policy and regulation, in processes and practices, and in capacity and incentives in cybersecurity in ports. That's what I'm planning to do with you now. So really talking about giving you a little bit of background on the report, then talking about the importance, the gaps, and then finally recommendations with regard to cybersecurity in ports. Let's talk about the report first, just to give you some high-level overview numbers and some information. We did a survey, and that is the core of the report. We did a survey with more than 100 port stakeholders around the world. We also did about 10 in-depth interviews and a lot of literature review. And obviously, a lot of consultations with and also a lot of reviews by peers. What we focused on are low and middle income countries. Obviously, we also include the high income countries, but we really care about cybersecurity in the ports of low and middle income countries. And we framed everything around three key areas: policy, practice, and barriers, and illustrate best practices through case studies. And ultimately, our main goal was to give actionable recommendations that are aimed at policymakers, policymakers for ports, port authorities, operators, port operators, and development partners as well. Always being technology agnostic. We don't care about the specific technologies you use, but we care about the processes that you put in place. And we want you to move from a reactive to a proactive approach as far as cybersecurity in ports is concerned. These were the survey respondents, or the responses that we got. And what you see here on the left side in terms of geography, about a quarter of the responses that we had, thank you very much, very active stakeholders there, came from Latin America and the Caribbean. And in terms of who responded, actually, is most of them were port authorities and terminal operators. They make up for about 3/4 of our responses. The rest, there were some ministries, some port associations, and other stakeholders. With that background in mind, let me quickly highlight why it is so important to think about cybersecurity in ports and to analyze what can be done better here. So why does it actually matter? I've already alluded to this. The whole digitalization of ports and maritime transport in general clearly improves efficiency and transparency, and ultimately also the competitiveness of this mode of transport. However, at the same time, we also expose ports to greater cyber risks, to risks that had not been there before. In former times, ports really kind of were physical gateways, kind of to move vessels and goods and people around. But nowadays, ports are really these kind of interconnected digital ecosystems between terminal operators, port authorities, customs, shipping lines, logistic providers, public agencies, and so on. And what we see there is a new set of risks emerge, and these are these cyber risks. And you think about, okay, maybe a computer may fail and so on, or maybe some data gets lost. But what we actually find there is that a cyber incident can really have direct financial impacts, can even cause physical damage with the operational equipment, be it cranes, be it guided vehicles, or so on, leads to a loss of trust and ultimately to wider trade flow disruptions. And that go way beyond the port boundaries. They can even go way beyond the national boundaries and have cross-border spillover effects into the entire kind of global supply chains. And therefore, our first key message is really, it's so important to think about cybersecurity as this building block to not only to enable, but also to safeguard economic development and make supply chains resilient. Couple of more numbers there. I already spoke about operations. So a cyber incident, depending on its gravity, obviously, kind of can damage operation systems and websites. In terms of operation systems, we have seen this in the port of Antwerp. We saw this with Costco shipping lines. We saw it with MSC. We saw it in the port of Seattle and so on. There are numerous examples. Stranded cargo or cargo can get stranded, and usually just-in-time supply chains get disrupted. Good examples there for this is the port of Nagoya in Japan that we discuss in the report, or DP World in Australia. And ultimately, and everybody I think knows about that and so on, entire terminals can can get closed and disrupted. Just think of Durban and Cape Town that had to declare force majeure and shut down for almost an entire week. In terms of the costs, these numbers here you see is about almost, the average cost is about $500,000, and that's a threefold increase from the previous years. The average ransom demand that we see there is about $3 million. And when you look at the cost of data breach across critical infrastructure, not only ports but critical infrastructure in general, the average cost that was concluded there is about $5 million. So we are really talking about big numbers here, and that's only the direct cost. When we look into the indirect cost, everybody is, I think, familiar with the NotPetya incident, the virus that actually, or the cyber attack that happened that paralyzed Maersk or APM terminals for several days with ripple effects for weeks and months. Here, the direct costs were, let's say, only $250 to $300 million for Maersk, but the indirect costs with all the ripple effects across the supply chains were estimated at more than $7 billion around the world. And within the World Bank, a colleague of mine, actually just 2 or 3 offices away from me, she ran some analysis and found that if we are able to reduce cyber incidents in a country, that actually leads to an increase of GDP per capita by 1.5%, because we avoid a lot of financial losses. With all that in mind, I would like to talk about the gaps that we found in cyber resilience of ports. And when I talk about gaps, I particularly want to focus on the gaps that we see between high-income countries and low-income countries in terms of their capacity to deal with cyber risks. But once again, emphasizing here that we haven't found any single port around the world where the ecosystem appears fully prepared and fully shielded against cyber incidents. What we saw there mostly across countries is an uneven compliance with cybersecurity frameworks. And something that was particularly shocking to me is that only half of the countries, or only half of the responses that we get, said that they comply either fully or partially with the law in terms of cybersecurity. And when you look at full compliance only, it's actually only a little bit more than a third of port stakeholders that comply fully with the law. What we've also found across the countries is inconsistent risk assessments and also preparedness in terms of how to respond to incidents. And while this is true for all income countries, the challenges are even more pronounced in low and middle income countries. And the reasons are manifold, but the main reasons here is really kind of the national and sectoral policy frameworks are usually weaker or thinner, the skill gaps are wider, and obviously financial and human resources are much more constrained. Now, let me give you one example in terms of policy. And what does it mean to deal with uneven requirements? The big problem of cybersecurity in ports, and we discussed this in the report, is that there is no binding global framework for port cybersecurity. The IMO and the International Ship and Port Facility Code, ISPS code, they provide very good foundations, and IAPH, the International Association of Ports and Harbors, for instance, Gadi worked on this. They feed more and more information and they push these organizations or these codes kind of to develop. But so far, the treatment of cybersecurity is still kind of in its nascent stage. For instance, only half of the countries worldwide have actually cybersecurity legislation that is applicable to infrastructure that is critical to national economies. And as I said at the beginning already, less than half of our surveyed stakeholders reported that they comply with existing frameworks. And just to give one very, very specific example here, so when we looked at high income, upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income countries, and asked them whether there is a cyber incident response team in place that they have to report to, or that they could report to. About 83% of the stakeholders in high income countries reported that yes, this exists. But 56%, so only about half of them in upper or lower middle income contexts, said that they can report to somebody when there is an incident and also get support from there. In terms of practice, let me also give you an example about how to adopt a proactive approach here. So far, what we found is that approaches are much more reactive than proactive. This is much more common so far. And that risks, but it is important to understand that risk assessments are really a basic component, a basic ingredient of proactive cybersecurity. And here it is really about addressing problems before they appear, and not only reacting after an incident appeared here. Just to give you one example here about cybersecurity risk assessments, we asked the stakeholders whether they did such a risk assessment in the past 24 months, obviously. And what we see is in high-income countries, about 80% of the respondents said, yes, we did so in the 24 months. But when you look at lower and middle income countries, that actually decreases to about 50%, in this case, 56% only. And the same is true for the question when we ask, hey, is cybersecurity somehow integrated in your business continuity planning? And here, in high-income countries, 58% tell us, yes, it is integrated there, but it's only 13%. So this is about 45 percentage points less in low-income countries. And as a last example here, in terms of barriers, the lack of skills prioritization that impacts the capability here. What we've come across is a lot of human, financial, and economic barriers that continue to limit progress towards cyber resilient supply chains. And what we see here is then when we ask about training, did you benefit from any training, cyber awareness training, cybersecurity training, and so on? Yes, about 85% of high-income country respondents said, yes, we had this, but once again, about only half in lower and middle-income countries. Once again, the same gap. And the big problem, another big problem that we noticed or observed here, is that in general, cybersecurity helps to avert losses, but it doesn't generate revenues. And therefore, it doesn't get the same kind of level of attention that other investment needs get. And one tool here that we discuss in the report is the idea of return on security investments, ROSI. And that is a tool that is a concept, a methodology that actually helps cybersecurity experts to justify their budgets and to justify why they need money in order to avoid losses in the future, and then basically contrast these avoided losses against the money invested. Ultimately, last point, unclear responsibilities like information gaps and free riding are also kind of weakening incentives to invest in cybersecurity. And we hardly found any voluntary information sharing, because whenever it's about digital data or about any data sharing in ports, ports are very, very, let's say, reluctant to do so. Let me wrap up with the recommendations, and there are many more and more detailed in the report. The first thing is what you can do is really strengthen your policy, ideally at the national level, make cyber rules binding for critical infrastructure and for ports specifically. Define clear responsibilities, who is responsible for what and when, and so on. And that also includes the idea of assign budgets. And make sure that those people that are responsible also have got the resources to work with this. We currently do an assessment in Colombia, for instance, a port sector cybersecurity maturity assessment. And whenever we hear that there is no specific budget for cybersecurity, we know that the maturity is relatively low, because then it's not taken as it's not considered as an individual building block. And then finally, make your incident reporting mandatory, because if you have no baseline and you don't know what you measure progress against, it gets really tricky. And also, the experts don't know what kind of new threats are actually out there that you have to prepare against. On improving the practice, I already mentioned this, move from a reactive to a proactive approach. Do risk assessments regularly. This includes kind of OT as well as IT inventories and vulnerability scans, and have response plans in place, kind of plan for it, what you do, drill it, and so on, what you do in terms of a cyber incident and how would you react. And ultimately, in order to overcome the barriers, invest in training and awareness, really kind of strengthen the human factor. Be more open, be more kind of proactive in information sharing, because ultimately, if you try to fight the attackers alone, you will be much less successful than if you do it with your peers in other ports. And ultimately, align incentives and make sure that you reconcile the kind of the private incentives that every contractor, that every private agent has here, with the collective interest or the collective responsibility for cyber resilience in ports. And as I said, next Tuesday, the report will be out. Monica will be happy to share it with all of you by email. And for now, I'm really looking forward to the other presenters' presentations and to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dominic, for this fantastic presentation and for sharing with us about the report and the very interesting findings of the survey. I'm looking forward to reading it next week and to sharing it with all as well. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Gary Benmosh. Gary Benmosh is Managing Director of Marine Innovators Consulting, offering consulting services focusing on digital transformation, innovation, and cybersecurity to port authorities, terminals, and maritime tech companies. As the active Vice Chair of the Data Collaboration Committee at the International Association of Ports and Harbors, he led the development of the IAPH Cyber Resilience Guidelines for Emerging Technologies in the Maritime Supply Chain, promoting cybersecurity best practices in global ports. Additionally, Gary leads the Maritime Cyber Program at the Israel National Cyber Directorate, and he's involved with key international organizations such as IMO, UNCEFAT, WEF, and IPCSA. Gary holds a BA in Computer Science and an MBA. Gary, it is a pleasure to have you here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Jorge, for inviting me to share one of my favorite topics, that is cybersecurity. So let me start sharing my presentation. Yeah. Okay, so what I will talk with you in the next few minutes, it's about the tools that the IAPH published that can help ports and the maritime supply chain at all to be a more resilient, cyber resilient. And I'm happy to hear the interesting presentation of Dominique. And I can say that if the present here, the participant here in this event will read the guidelines and implement it in the ports, I hope that the next survey that the World Bank will do will look a bit different, mainly in the low-income countries. So a few words about IAPH. We are the International Association of Ports and Harbors that were founded in 1955. 70 years ago that we celebrated in Kobe in our annual event. And this year will be in London, and you are in November, and you are invited to join and hear there more about ports and our activity. In our organization, we have more than 380 members, which are part of them. More than 200 are ports and port authorities, and also port-related businesses such as consulting companies and service providers of the ports. The backbone of the IAPH activity is the technical committees, and we have three main committees. One of them is climate and energy, the other one is risk and resilience, and the third one, in which I am the vice chair, is data collaboration, in which we deal with digital transformation, innovation, and cybersecurity. Our activity in cybersecurity, as I mentioned before, started even in 2021 after the COVID, or while COVID, that we called for more digitalization that was needed because of the pandemic. Also, the need for secure digitalization arose. So we also see this today, because in a survey that IAPH did and was published recently, we can see that cybersecurity for the ports, for most of the ports, it's the most important risk factor that are perceived by them. 61% they said that it's the higher risk, and it's even more than natural disasters or climate change. So I think that ports today, after so much time, they are feeling and understanding that this is something that they have to invest in. In the guidelines that we published in 2021, we are dealing exactly with that. We are giving a tool, a guidelines for ports to be more resilient, cyber resilient. It was developed by a group of 22 experts that were members from IAPH from around the world, with also contributors from the World Bank. And it was endorsed by IMO FAL Committee 46 4 years ago, and it was added to IMO Cybersecurity Guidelines on Maritime Cyber Risk Management. These guidelines have 80 pages that I invite everybody to read, but I will give the main, the essential steps in cyber resilience, the essential steps towards, something, yes. The 5 essential steps towards cyber resilience. First of all, is that the port leaders should acknowledge the cyber risk management as a top-level responsibility. And I think that Dominic talked about that unfortunately, until today, many ports and management see cyber security as that generates losses and not revenues, and that's the reason that the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO, is have a hard time on convincing to having more budget to invest in more cybersecurity. The second thing is that the success of cyber risk management begins with and depends on a common understanding of terms, also in the financial grounding that, like Dominic said, and also the shared responsibility that everybody have in the ports. Because when we did, for example, in a big port in the US, cybersecurity exercise, and when we talked with the different departments in the ports, they said, okay, we don't need to do nothing in the cyber crisis. We have a great IT department. They have great backups. They will sort it out. But no, it's a shared responsibility of everybody to be prepared for this cyber attack that, unfortunately, it's not the question if it will happen, it's when it will happen. At the end, we say that we can't minimize the threat until you understand the risk. And for understanding the risk, you need to know what your vulnerabilities and what are your assets, and at the end, understand what are the risks of those assets. The technical part arrives only in the end, the technical part of protecting, detecting, and mitigating the cyber risk. And the most important thing, and this is one of the reasons that we are here, and also I think that Dominic mentioned that, is the awareness, the training that is needed. We need to make more awareness in the maritime industry about the cybersecurity needs, and also the training. We need people that are more professional in cybersecurity. If I continue in another aspect and getting back to the recent survey of IAPH, we are happy to see that there is a lot of adoption of emerging technologies in the polls. As you can see here, already more than 51% of the polls that answered our survey already implemented automation. 47% of code have IoT implemented. 42% already implemented AI, and also drones and 5G. So it's great, but this also something that we thought about it in a couple of years ago, that we said, okay, great, we need pods to invest more in, and we want to help pods to invest more in implementing emerging technologies in pods. But cybersecurity, what about that? It's important to implement during and taking into account the cybersecurity of the new technologies. That is the reason that we, together with colleagues from, again, it was this time 28 experts from IAPH members for all the 6 regions of IAPH, and contributions also from the World Bank, but also from the World Economic Forum. We developed the IAPH Cyber Resilience Guidelines for Emerging Technologies in the Maritime Supply Chain. In these guidelines, we talked about quantum, we talked about artificial intelligence, drones, Internet of Things, 5G, automation, but also green energy, and we will talk about that in a minute. Another aspect that we understand that is important to put into these guidelines is also about training, because also training have a role, an important role in how to implement in a cyber resilient way emerging technologies in the pods. And legislation, I think that Dominique and I think the same legislation also have to support a cyber resilient implementation of emerging technologies in pods. One thing that I can tell, and because Spanish also is very close to my heart, because I was born in Argentina, one of the things that we did in these guidelines that also to help closing the gaps between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, is to publish simultaneously the guidelines in English and in Spanish. So nobody have to wait until it will be translated. We publish simultaneously in English and in Spanish, so you can find here, and when the presentation will be circulated with you, you can download those guidelines. These guidelines also was endorsed by IMO FAO. It was 2 months ago, and it will be added to IMO Cybersecurity Guidelines on Maritime Cyber Risk Management. Let me tell you also here a number of the key elements of the cybersecurity guidelines. It's again about 80 pages that I invite you to read, but those are the main principles for achieving a cybersecure implementation of emerging technologies in the maritime supply chain. The first one is that it's important to integrate aspect of cybersecurity in the early stage of the implementation. We call it cybersecurity by design. Okay, don't start implementing a new technology without taking with you the CISO, the cybersecurity officer, and working together for a more secure implementation of the new technologies. Imagine, today, also with the geopolitical problems that there are today in the world, there is a lot of GSM spoofing, and imagine if it was 40 years ago when the GPS was invented. Imagine if then they would do cybersecurity by design. Maybe today we wouldn't have the problems that we have in the spoofing of signaling of GPS. So that's important today. Let's learn from our mistakes, and let's implement the new technologies, taking into account the cybersecurity as one of the top priorities. It's also important to assess cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities in technologies that that we don't plan to implement even in our organization. I can give you the example of quantum technology. Maybe you saw in the previous slide that only 2% started of the ports that replied to our survey, only 2% started to do something with quantum. So if you are in a port, you can say, okay, I don't think that I will do something with port for the 5 next years. So why do I need to do something? But let me tell you a new abbreviation that it's HESL. It's harvest now, decrypt later. And the thing that attackers, cyber attackers do today, they steal your data that is encrypted, knowing that a couple of years from now, when quantum computer will be available, widely available, they will be able to decrypt your database, and then they can, do extortion and things like that. So this is important, that even if you don't plan to implement the technology, it's important for you to know the vulnerabilities and to act accordingly. Another aspect is that you shall avoid the misconception that non-IT systems do not require cybersecurity assessment. If you recall, one of our chapters is green energy. You could say, come on, green energy, hydrogen or whatever, new electricity, onshore power and things like that. Why it is something that I need to talk about cybersecurity? It's not an IT system, no, but each of those systems, for example, management systems and OT that controls the power grid and things like that, and those can be attacked by cyber. So it's important to take into account the cybersecurity and do a cybersecurity assessment also in those systems that you think at first thought that it's not IT related. Another important thing in the implementation is that you need to conduct a holistic cybersecurity assessment when integrating multiple technologies. And an example, it's automation. Automation, it's one name, you call it automation, but automation is achieved by a number of connected systems. It's an IoT device that is connected through 5G, that is maybe in the management system have AI upon that. So it's in many technologies, and it's not enough to assess them separately. You need to do also an holistic view of the interconnections between the technologies. And the last principle, and those who know me know that I'm an optimistic person, it's let's look at the bright side of the cybersecurity of the new technologies. So look for new cybersecurity solutions that are enabled by emerging technologies. Today, AI brings a lot of new risks for our systems, but in the other end, have a lot of new implementation, new cyber solutions that are empowered and enabled by AI. For example, better firewalls or better mail that we can look for malicious mails. So AI can also help us in implementing cybersecurity. So be active in looking for these new solutions. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that we shall continue implementing innovation in ports, but let's do it in a resilient way. And I hope that we'll see you in London and talk more about cybersecurity. Back to you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Gabi, for this excellent presentation and for sharing valuable insights of the guidelines. I would also like to echo your point on the importance of training, as the implementation and operation of emerging technologies must be carried out in a secure and responsible manner. Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Romel Edwards. Mr. Romel is the manager of the Digital Innovation and Development Department at Barbados Port Inc., BPI, with over 25 years of With over 25 years at BPI, he has led the development and implementation of more than 40 digital solutions focused on port operations, trade facilitation, cybersecurity, and maritime resilience. His key achievements include integrating customs with BPI systems, implementing BPI's first cloud-based terminal operating system, and launching the organization's first online payment platform. Under his leadership, Barbados Port Inc. successfully implemented the Barbados Port Community System and the Barbados Maritime Single Window, advancing secure digital collaboration among port stakeholders and government agencies. Mr. Edwards is a certified port executive, certified NIST cybersecurity lead implementer, and certified NIST AI risk management framework architect. He chairs the Barbados Port Community Systems Technical and Cybersecurity Committees, represents BPI on the steering committee for the Barbados Electronic Single Window for Trade, and sits on the Barbados National Cybersecurity Advisory Committee. Through his work, he continues to advocate for secure, resilient, and technology-driven modernization within the maritime sector. Thank you, Romero, for joining us. We are so excited to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Monica, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So for the next 15 minutes or so, what I'll do is just to give you context from a small island developing state. This first slide just introduces Barbados Port, the port of Bridgetown, and what I want you to gather from here is that, number one, the sole seaport in the island is responsible for over 90% of the imports. We are one of the few ports that would have actually built out our own systems as opposed to buy. And this kind of sets the context for the remainder of this presentation. Now, as we evolved, we would have started from a paper-based operation. And this picture actually has a lot of significance for us because this reminds us of where we were. Ports, just like Barbados, would have often be siloed, and then within each department, those departments would have also acted as their own silos. A lot of the information was paper-based. So what we have now evolved to, what we will find out is that we are not just moving cargo, we are now moving a lot of information, and that will play a key role in the remainder of what I have to say. Now, ports are attractive cyber targets. We've had several attempts, especially since we've transitioned into a digital era. We've had several attempts here at Barbados Port Inc. We've had also supply chain attacks making their way into software that we use to develop. And even though we have an on-premise development team, and many ports don't, what you will find and what you have to be careful about is that these supply chain attacks can also make their way into the software that you as a major port uses, even if you don't have developers on staff. Now, we would have come a long way in terms of our digital transformation journey. We, as I would have mentioned earlier, built our own port community system, our own maritime single window, and this gave us a lot of lessons to learn. One of the two major implementations we would have had as well would have been integration with the customs escrow system. That was a major implementation, and we also had our first cloud-based terminal operating system. And then this gave way into agency interoperability, and this was something that was not happening before. Now, what we would have also learned is that a lot of our cybersecurity initiatives were not getting the same attention as revenue generating projects, and this was a point made earlier. These cybersecurity initiatives, they're not seen as revenue generating. Of course, if there's an incident, then we get the significance of those. So cybersecurity, as would have mentioned by my colleagues earlier, it is not to be bolted on afterwards. We have to build cybersecurity into your design. And I'm very proud to say the entire digital innovation development team, everyone now has DevSecOps training, and what that essentially is building cybersecurity into your software development lifecycle. And by doing this, we can build cybersecurity into anything that we design and build. Now, if you bring your cybersecurity after your development, then you can already assume that you're behind. Now, many lessons would have been learned over the course of our development, our journey. And one of them was that the resilience is just as important as prevention. So a lot of people may focus on prevention, but then what happens if there's a successful attack? Then this is where your resilience is going to come into play. So that is just as important as your prevention. We actually suffered an outage a few months ago where one of our major internet service providers, they went offline, and it actually crippled some of our operations. And then our partners, so some government agencies that are critical to the logistics sector, because they use that service provider, they were also crippled. And unlike Barbados Port Inc., where we had a redundant provider, the others didn't. What it resulted in is that no one could operate because the port cannot operate for these key stakeholders. And we thought to ourselves, so what if this was a cyber attack as opposed to physical damage to infrastructure? And that made us think even more about resilience. I'm happy to state, and I hope it was in Dominic's report, but I'm happy to say that Barbados does have a national cybersecurity incident response team, and we are in constant communication with that team. And that has provided an additional level of resilience for us. So the question here is not necessarily whether a disruption will occur, it's more when, because it is going to happen. And you really have to focus not just on your prevention, but on your resilience. And then there's the human factor. So this picture here, they say pictures paint 1,000 words. And this picture here is something that I've seen still exists. You still have people writing down passwords or sharing passwords with their colleagues. And what we must understand now is that most breaches actually target the human, because the human has slowly become, in very many instances, the weakest link in the entire system. So you have your hardware, you have your software, you have your user. And what you will find is that a lot of cyber attacks now target the user, because the user actually becomes the weakest link in the entire setup. And a lot of this is because of the mindset. So you have people who still think that cybersecurity is an IT function. Well, it is not. And cybersecurity is a company-wide function. Every single person has their role to play in cybersecurity. Now, after developing these systems, actually, while developing these systems, we did not develop in a silo. We would have been collaborating with several other ports who would have done this before, and also other regional and international bodies. And of course, I want to specifically mention here the OAS-SIP. I want to mention the IPCSA, the International Port Community Systems Association. We do have the IAPH being represented here as well. And these were essential partners in our path to where we are now. The collaboration is extremely important, and I would, advise anyone to not develop in a silo. Use the bodies of knowledge that are out there. We have regional bodies as well. There's the Caribbean Shipping Association, there's the Port Management Association of the Caribbean. So these are all bodies that we take advantage of, and depending on where you are located in the world, I would urge you to, keep those channels open. So in terms of the future, we, again, and looking back at our lessons learned, what we did realize is that legislation was a great enabler. And this is where, I'm not a legal luminary, nobody on my team is, but this is where I advise anyone taking this path, to also look at your legislation, because very often you will find that you have these great tools and they're either not being used at all or not being used to their fullest because the people who you have targeted have been limited by their own antiquated legislation. So your legislation needs to keep up with your technology. And here in Barbados, we actually developed our legislation in parallel with the Port Community System and MSW, Maritime Single Window. And this was to overcome any foreseen limitations. And because we have done that, that has actually given us great success in rolling out these two initiatives. What you would also see is that your OT, your operational technology, is usually deemed less important than your IT. But this is a mindset that has to change as well. We have started a digital twin initiative. It is in its nascent stages, but we want to use that for various purposes as well. And one of the major things is modeling cyber threats. And then because of where we're located, we are vulnerable to hurricanes, to earthquakes, to volcanic activity. So we have to model those threats as well, because cybersecurity does have a physical aspect as well to it. You will also notice that cybersecurity has been gradually being adopted into guidelines set up by the IMO and into ISPS codes as well. So, we are seeing this increased awareness of cybersecurity. So, to quote the assistant manager of my department, Miss Kemi, do not call her name Brewster, data is the new oil. And that resonates with us all the time. That is her saying, she copyrights it, but data is the new oil. And you have to treat data as importantly as you are treating the cargo in which you are handling, because you're not only moving cargo, you are moving data. And in this case, we should set up mandatory reporting. But in doing so, we should also set up a safe space for that reporting, because there are a lot of entities who will prefer not to report an incident due to reputational damage. And that is not the kind of culture that we want to promote. So yes, have your mandatory reporting, but make it a safe space, a space where the reporting of that information is beneficial for all within the port community. We would also recommend consistent cyber audits and sustained collaboration with key stakeholders, actually with all stakeholders within your community. And that brings me to the end. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Romel, for this amazing presentation as always, and for sharing from BPI's perspective what it is to be cyber resilient and the importance of prevention. I believe your experience and the lessons learned you shared will be useful to the audience. Thank you so much. And thank you to the rest of the speakers as well. I would like for the speakers to turn on their video cameras so we can continue with the Q&A session. Okay, excellent. I see you all now. The first question is for Dominic. Are there any cybersecurity trends specific to Latin America and the Caribbean that you can share from the survey?
Dominic, your audio, your microphone is on.
Yes, you're on mute, sorry.
Oh, okay, beginner's mistake. Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very good question, Monica. And I have to say that in general, Latin America responded similarly to the rest of the world. So there were no big differences in how Latin America and the Caribbean followed international standards, for instance, or conducted assessments or shared information. That was at very comparable rates. But there were three things that struck me particularly where Latin America differed from the rest of the world. And that was mostly in the prevalence or the existence of cyber incident response teams, in the offerings of cyber awareness trainings, and in the organization of cyber drills. And when you look here at the numbers, we found, for instance, that about 55% of the respondents across the world had cyber incident response teams in place. However, compared to these 55%, we only saw 19% in Latin America. So that is a much lower number. Rommel, just to let you know, I'm very happy that Barbados is among these 19%, so that gives some faith and that this number can increase in the future. The same is about awareness and trainings, where we had about 57% of respondents that said that they benefited or offered such a training for employees. But once again, in Latin America, this was also only 27%, so even less than half of it. And the same is about drills, where we had 47% of port stakeholders organizing drills around the world, but only 23% in Latin America. So therefore, I would say if Latin America can do one thing, then it's really about strengthening the human element and offering more kind of to build up the capacities and to make these capacities available when cybersecurity responses and awareness is needed.
Thank you so much, Dominic, for answering the question. Thank you. Our next question is for Gary. Can you give us another example of a non-IT system which requires cybersecurity assessment?
Thank you, Monica. And in the presentation, I talk about green energy. That is one example, but the other example can be drones. In most of the ports, how drones start operating the port, it's somebody say, okay, there's a drone, maybe we can use it here for security. And it can start not from the IT, it can start also from the security officer, it can start from even somebody from the construction. Let's use these drones for supervising the construction area. Okay, and the use of materials, they are great drones. And they can say that this disconnected from everything. Okay, they bring it from home even or buy it in eBay. So this is another example that we have to take into account. If you recall before, the survey that we did said that 51% already of the ports already implemented drones. I'm pretty sure that much of them didn't do any cybersecurity assessment before they did that. So we still 49% of the ports that didn't do that. Please take it into account, the cybersecurity, before you implement drones.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gary. Next question is for Romel. Many ports are rapidly digitizing, but this also increases cyber risk. From your experience implementing the Barbados Port Community System and Maritime Single Window, what are the biggest cybersecurity lessons ports should learn?
Okay, so one of the big takeaways for us was this, we have people who still separate the IT function, separate cybersecurity from everything else. And especially when the project is complete, then all of a sudden everyone goes back to cybersecurity being an IT function. But the two must remain embedded. And you build that into the architecture of your system so that they remain embedded. Once you have that separation, then you're creating a very huge cyber risk. When we would have implemented our PCS and our MSW, one of the other lessons that we would have learned is also developing supporting legislation. We would have designed so we would have had consultation with the lawmakers, but we also designed governance and policies into the operation of these systems. And again, not all, people think of cybersecurity as just something technical, but there are many supporting pillars, and legislation, governance, policies, those are big things that you need to take into consideration. And we, as I would have stated earlier in the presentation, we would have also learned that resilience is just as important as prevention. So, you take all these steps to make sure that you are as bulletproof as possible. But what if one of those bullets actually breaks your barriers? So then you have to think about how you respond. You have to think about how you recover. And this is part of your entire resilience, just how quickly you can get back on your feet. So that is a big thing. And, so cybersecurity within ports is no longer just a technical issue. It requires the executive buy-in, it requires operational awareness, it requires staff training. We are very heavy on staff training, governance frameworks, and of course, you don't do it in a silo. We happen to sit in the CARICOM as an entire member of several states. So then you have this, maintain your regional collaboration as well.
Thank you so much, Romel. Thank you. Our next question is for Dominic. What are some of the common mistakes that port stakeholders make when it comes to cybersecurity?
I would say if there is one single common mistake, then it is that a lot of port stakeholders may still assume that things will continue as they always have, that it's going to be business as usual. However, one thing that we've really concluded, it's not going to be business as usual. Ports get more and more digital, and proportionately, and if maybe not even exponentially, the cyber risks are going to increase at the same time. And this means whether you like it or not, it is necessary to prepare for the fact that disruptions caused by cyber incidents, either cyber incident in your own port or somewhere in your supply chain or somewhere in another port and so on, are going to have ripple effects on you, and you have to deal with it. And this is where you need to plan for, you have to have business continuity plans in place. You need to run drills and so on, that people really know what to do when things happen. And you have to validate over and over again what works and what doesn't work. And why do I say that it rather becomes worse is everybody has read in the news recently. I mean, we've now new large language models out there, Mythos, we've got Big Sleep and so on. So it is important to prepare that kind of machine speed attacks are going to come at some point of time. And that requires automated defense and more modernization and everything. And therefore, it is be prepared. And in my opinion, focus on three things. One is really kind of, and they have been mentioned already, but I would like to emphasize them. Awareness from the CEO level down to the dock worker. For everybody, kind of whenever you realize something like, okay, that is a vulnerability, that is a threat, that is an incident, and so on, notify, kind of let your people know that something needs to be done, and so on. Be aware that this could have serious effects now. The second thing, and this, I spoke about our assessment, the maturity assessment in Colombia, and there it became really clear. If you don't have a dedicated budget for cybersecurity in ports, you're not taking it seriously enough. Then it is something like, if it falls somehow under general security or under IT and so on, then it's not important to you. There needs to be the dedicated budget in order really to show the importance. And I would like to emphasize what Rommel had said already. Implement and cultivate and nurture a no-blame culture and so on. If individuals or whole organizations are ashamed of reporting that they have been attacked, that the mistake was made, and so on, that is basically a free lunch or an invitation to the attackers to try the same thing with your neighbors, with your peers, with your competitors, and so on. No, basically share that you've been attacked, ask for help, and so on. Encourage everybody to do it. That's the only way how you can defend better in the future.
I agree. Thank you so much, Dominic. Our next question is for Gadi. Can you share with us the latest IAPH activity at IMO Fall regarding maritime single window cybersecurity? Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And okay, I will start, and I will share with you about our activity there, that it's activity related to regulation. But I would like to say, also Dominic and Romel said about the importance of the regulation needed and legislation that is needed in each country. I totally agree with them, and as we will talk about in a minute, I will tell what we do in IAPH about that. But I want to disagree in one thing. It's that the ports don't have to wait for the legislation and for the regulation, because it's a long journey. It's a long journey. So be aware, you here in the room, ports, it's for your own good. You don't have to wait for legislation. But still, legislation, regulation is good. It's important. That's the reason that we are very active in this matter. And we are very consistent. Okay, it's as I said, it's a long journey. And regarding maritime single window, we started in IMO file 48 2 years ago. That we wanted to put one sentence in the file convention saying that it's mandatory to have cybersecurity measures in the maritime single window. Okay, it's one sentence. It took us 2 years. But I'm happy to say that in this file 50, after discussions, we have a new sentence that says that contracting governments and their relevant authorities shall implement mandatory cybersecurity measures to safeguard single windows, taking into account their national legislation. And also, they should be technology neutral, because legislation, today we talk about the changes that will be with AI and things like that. Legislation can't be in the same pace like technology. So this is something that was confirmed at IMO file 50, and now the final steps to be in the convention, in the file convention. So this is something that we are in some way helping also the CISO, because again, I was the CIO official also. I know that the other side, when you are a CISO and you want budget or you want to implement something, you need to give a reason why. And the reason why is the legislation that it will be mandatory. So this is one thing that we are doing. Another activity that we are also active with, it's the lead of the Department of Transportation of England, of the UK. It's about a new cyber code, but that will be part of IMO file. So we are working on that in a correspondence group, and we hope also that this will give a better focus on cybersecurity by IMO. And one thing that we are also emphasizing, that IMO also in the cybersecurity, until now we're more focused in the ship side, but we are talking about the maritime supply chain. That's the important thing, to look at the whole supply chain, and this is how the code will look like. So these are two things, and let me add the third one. At IMO, there is a new IMO digitalization strategy, and that will incorporate a cybersecurity part that also we are part of the correspondence group. So don't wait for that, okay? But it's important, and each country have to do something about it.
Thank you so much, Gadi. The last question of the Q&A session is for Romel. Small island developing states are often perceived as being behind larger nations in digital transformation and cybersecurity. How has Barbados approached this challenge?
All right, thanks for that question. So first of all, we did not think or act as if we were small. So as a small island developing state, we depend heavily on tourism. We depend heavily on maritime trade. We depend heavily on efficient border control. And that actually forced us into viewing digital transformation as something mandatory, as something of national significance, rather than an optional project. And that mindset is where it really began. And further that, instead of waiting on, an off-the-shelf solution, because the ones that we would have reviewed, they're geared towards larger ports, we actually took the very brave step to develop our own systems, and to hire our own teams, and to train our own teams. And that represented an investment in our entire cybersecurity posture, in our entire digital transformation initiative, that you would not have gotten had you bought a system off the shelf. So that investment in our own systems actually has paid off substantially. The state of, being a small island developing state actually gives us an advantage in terms of our agility. So, there was a lot of red tape that would have had to go through. We were able to pivot very quickly. And then one of the things, finally, is the entire culture. We have a top-down approach to digital transformation that comes all the way from our prime minister all the way down. And that actually played a very big role because, you must have that culture change. You must have that change management. It cannot be business as usual. So we are no longer discussing, for instance, whether digital transformation is necessary. We know it is. We're now focused on resilience. We're now focused on interoperability. We're now focused on predictive analytics. That's actually a very big thing. So, we're focused on all these things. And, these may sound like buzzwords now, but over the next few years, maybe even much less, you would realize that, these are things that are mandatory. So we do not think small at all. We, pretend as if we're big and we make big moves. We have that culture, that top-down approach, culture change, and this is what actually enabled us.
Thank you so much, Romel. And with that, we finish the Q&A session. As we come to the end of today's webinar, I would like to sincerely thank all of our speakers for their valuable insights and for sharing their expertise on such a critical and evolving topic. We have heard today about the importance of strengthening cyber resilience across the maritime and port sector, the need to stay ahead of emerging threats, and the value of continued collaboration between international organizations, port authorities, and industry stakeholders. Cybersecurity is not a one-time effort, but a continuous commitment that requires coordination, awareness, and shared responsibility across the entire system. We hope today's session has provided useful perspectives and practical takeaways that you can apply in your own institutions and contexts. And thank you once again for your participation. And now I would like to return the floor to Jorge Duran for his closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much for moderating and leading the webinar. And needless to say, to the three presenters, thank you very much. I took some notes, and I always like to, at the end of the webinar, see if I can pull some threads through all presentations. And well, Dominic, you, Gadi, and Romel all agreed in that cyber cannot be considered afterwards as, oops, let's do a patch. It needs to be considered from the inception of the technological project or digitalization project that you're thinking about. Cyber is part of it. It needs to be intrinsic and organic to how projects are implemented. So that was a common theme between the three of you that I found very refreshing. In addition, I also found another common thread, which is the cyber assessments. You need to keep on your toes. And like Roman was saying, you think the port is going to operate as usual. No, you're wrong. Things are changing. Is a paradigm shift, and these risk assessments need to be had. And another thing that you all three agreed upon and mentioned is the importance of having appropriate policy and legislation, both to guide the development of the projects, but also to sanction and punish and have clear rules and responsibilities as who does what, who is responsible for what. So the three of you, I think these are the three major takeaways, at least that I'm taking home with me. In addition to that, Dominic, of course, presented a preview of the study, which we're all looking forward to seeing on Tuesday. The gaps between the countries, the policy constraints, the barriers, the lack of a global framework. And this is very important because we wish we had something like the ISPS code, that it is mandatory and enforceable in every port in the world. We wish we had a similar sort of tool for cyber. But in lieu of that, well, here we have the study with Dominic, and of course I'm going to speak about guidelines and the guidelines in a minute. But what's happened is that because the IMI, or IMO in English, I'm sorry, the IMO doesn't update the ISPS code to include this, then we all have to do as we do best. We develop in-house rules and this, which is why studies like the World Banks and guys like the International Association of Port Harbours are so crucially important, because not only do they tell us what to do, but if we all do the same thing, then we're all on the same boat, and easier to solve problems. The awareness. Two of you mentioned the fact that these investments, because they don't generate revenue, are put on the back burner. They're like, no, 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 let's invest in whatever is going to produce me more money and more revenue. But if you don't invest, because it's an investment, it's not an expenditure, it's an investment in your cyber, then believe you me, you're going to be sorry later on that you didn't invest, because the cost is going to be absolutely so much higher than whatever your investment in cyber would have cost. So I think that came across very clear. Um, yes, the no return investment, data sharing. All of the three of you mentioned that as well, and here's something that was alluded to, even though both Gadi and Roman mentioned it, but it's training and cyber awareness. And I think Dominic also said something about cyber awareness. This is vital. In fact, here in the OAS, we have a very robust cybersecurity thing where it constantly sends us fake emails, phishing emails, and PayPal wants to give you back $100. Yeah, right. And we have had to go through trainings to learn the phishing, to do this, and when we get that, you report it, and then they tell you, oh yes, it's a phishing test, and you just passed it. And if you goof, you have to go back and get retrained and do it again. And as Romel was saying, this is a company-wide effort. It is not to the CEO or the director of IT, because again, separating IT from cyber makes no sense. It permeates the company, from the janitor that is cleaning the floors, and everybody, to the CEO. We are all responsible and accountable for making secure practices. For instance, the old memory stick that you used to have back in the day. Remember, you have your presentation, you go where you're going, you give it to them, they give you a presentation, and then they give it back to you. And then you put it back into your computer and infect the whole network, everything. So these things, I now carry disposable of memory sticks that I just, give away, and I don't want to buy. But it's things like that where, you can get a Trojan, any sort of malware on it, and you put it back in your computer, and now you've infected your whole organization's network. So Gadi spoke about these incredibly important guidelines that the AIPH has put out. They had put out once before or twice, and this is, I guess, Gadi, sort of not only the cyber resiliency, but the cyber security guidelines. There's two different guidelines, and he was kind enough, like Dominic, to share a link on the chat for us to do that. So again, legislation, policy, the importance of integrating cyber from the beginning, assessing risk, avoiding and here's something that Gadi said: using AI as your cyber security cop. That's an interesting thing that I hadn't really gotten to, but thank you. And then last but not least, we have somebody from a port that has, in fact, received several attacks directly, and has managed to overcome the possible dangers. And both Dominic and Rommel made the thing is that if you get attacked in the port, the damage, the reverberations of that is going to go well beyond the port. It's going to go into the supply chain. It's going to cause global disruptions, maybe. And I must also congratulate Romelin, not only that Barbados wrote their own code and they have a proprietary solution, and they're available to anybody who is interested. At some point, I believe we were talking to a country in the Caribbean who said, listen, Barbados, can you host our PCS on your cloud, on your solution, so we don't have to do it? We're a small port like you. And so it's there for the taking. It is there to be taken advantage of. And last but not least, My emphasis, because this is a lot that we do here, is training and education and awareness. And the weakest link, the weakest link is us, is the humans. We are the most likely source of a mistake being made throughout the thing. So that's what I got for as a take home. Thank you to the three of you. Please open up your mics so that I can give you the floor and you can say some final and concluding thoughts. So I'll just do it in the order I have here, which is Gadi. Please go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Jorge. It seems that you listened very well and you took the main points. And what I can emphasize that we are here in IAPH to assess and to help the port authorities, and will be helped also to invite you to help us to be part of the collaboration committee, so we can work in the next guidelines or next need that the ports will have.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you very much. Toda. Dominic.
Same here. I have to say, Jorge, impressed. Usually the chair gives some warm words at the end without any reference to what has been said here before. You've passed the test. You get an A+ from me, kind of. You didn't miss anything. Many thanks for the invitation. And I would like to address once again all our about almost 100 participants here. Many thanks for your interest in the topic. And this is an open invitation. I'm going to put my email address into the chat. Both the OAS CIP as well as the World Bank, we are here for you. We are here to support you on cybersecurity. We are here to support you on digitalization of ports in general. And if you have anything else, be it port efficiency, be it decarbonization and so on, be it supply chain resilience, more general, climate resilience and so on, reach out to us and we can see if we can't do anything, maybe we know partners that can do something for you. We really love working with the Latin American and Caribbean states. Just let us know what you need and we will see. I can't promise that we have a solution, but I can promise to you that we will look for one. Thank you so much, and it has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. And then Iceman, Rommel Iceman Edwards.
Yes, so thank you very much again for giving us yet another opportunity to, share the knowledge that we would have gained over several years. You guys at the OAS SIP, you all are like family now. And this one in particular, it hits home because when we started this, when we embarked on this trajectory, let's say if we had 10 people on our side, I would say roughly 8 out of 10 of them actually thought we should buy a system. And there was great pushback in the beginning, but we persevered. We also did so sensibly. And it worked out. It worked out tremendously. We have a proven system. We have a team that is heavily invested in the continued development and enhancement of that system. And now we have been able to demonstrate this there to other territories. So my message to other small island developing states, think big. Look at what you have, look at your resources, and Barbados is here ready for any assistance you may need.
Thank you very much to all three of you, to all four of you, counting Monica, of course. Without this, who would have never been able to do. And I thank the audience for your interest and your time. We all value time so much, and I thank the speakers for donating your time and expertise in favor of the development of the port sector in Latin America. And as I bid my farewell, I wanted to remind all of you that we have another webinar on June 3rd on a very interesting environment with a new associate member, which is Drake Marine Solutions. And we will be talking about the fouling of fuels. It's called From Hull to Habitat, right? So we're going to be dealing with interesting things like ballast water and contaminants and the fuel and so forth. So again, thank you for listening, and I invite you to join that webinar on Wednesday, June 3rd. Thank you all very, very much. Hasta la próxima. Till next time. Thank you.
All the best. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
We join the VIP room.